The Peeragogy in Action podcast. This is episode 9, Peeragogy, of course. In the Peeragogy project, we collaborate to build a no longer missing guide to all things relevant to successful peer learning and peer production. The Peeragogy in Action live stream video and audio podcast aims to provide an interactive space where participants and audience can explore the philosophies, concepts, contributors, and practical applications of peeragogy. We aim to keep the discussions informal and free-flowing within some minimal guidelines, generally 2 to 3 talking points or topics. We live stream via videos to the Peeragogy channels on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Facebook. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcast app. More details about where to find the podcast at peerspress.com/podcasts or peeragogy.org. Additionally, archive recordings reside on our YouTube channel. And for those of you in the audience, please, wherever you are, comment during the show, and we'll have time for Q&A at the end. All right. Hey, so today we're talking about the Peeragogy course. And in the booth with me, I have Sherry and Antoine, Executive Director of Afro-Free Culture, Crowdsourcing Wikimedia, also known as Afro Crowd. Kristy Roschke, Managing Director of News in the Collab Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication at Arizona State University. Pete Forsyth, the Principal at Wiki Strategies. And Howard Rheingold, who's an independent thinker, online instigator, novice educator, expert learner, and offline gardener, in addition to being an instigator of the Peeragogy project. All right. And now for our first topic, we're going to talk about what is the Peeragogy pilot course. And Howard, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, the Peeragogy project started about 10 years ago after teaching college students for 10 years and becoming more and more aware that students are learners, and instead of having teachers and students, we ended up having co-learners, and that learning is a social activity. And right now we have an opportunity that actually has not existed before, in the sense that if you had to learn something, you wanted to learn something, until pretty recently you had to go to a school to do it. But now we've got the web, and we've got Wikipedia, and we've got search, and we have open educational resources and tools like streaming video, all kinds of tools that don't cost anything. Why can't any group of people who want to learn something figure out how to learn it together? What's missing is how do you do that? So the Peeragogy handbook, which you can find at peeragogy.org, is the result of a group of us grappling with the question of what should people know in order to have the best kind of peer learning. Very recently, it occurred to us that maybe we ought to do an online course about that. And the original creation of the Peeragogy handbook was really an example of peeragogy, in that people literally from all over the world who had not known each other, we got together and figured out what media to use and what methods to use and how to divide the work and come up with a handbook together. So the idea of a pilot course is that let's get some people together and figure out how we can put this handbook into action, and how people all over can use the pilot course to get themselves started on this. And I think just as the creation of the handbook was an example and a challenge of peeragogy, I think that we ought to make that challenge for the course as well. I personally don't have an idea right now of exactly how we're going to make a course that is in itself an example of pedagogy. But we know some things, and we're going to present those things in a way in which we are all co-learners. So the people who join the course are going to help us create the course. That's the pilot part of it. And we're going to use a variety of media. We'll be using video and with synchronous chat and asynchronous forum, and we'll have collaborative documents and whatever else seems appropriate to the task. So this is an invitation to anybody who's interested in the new possibilities that the resources on the internet provide for us, to put that into action, whether you are in a formal academic setting or you and a group of friends want to learn something.
Awesome. Thank you. And yeah, I think I'm excited about the challenge of having the course be like an example of pedagogy itself. And for those of you who do, if you're interested, we have an interest forum available, and it's on peeragogy.org, and also find it in our Twitter feed. And please sign up there, and then we will, once the course is officially live, we'll share that info with you. And as Howard said, we'll be co-learners, and also like the course is it's meant to be, the pilot is for what you do. If you want to join as, just as a learner and follow along, that's fine. But also if you want to be a co-designer, that's definitely something we're interested in having. And so we talked a lot about pedagogy and some of the history of it and different things, but and one example of it in action, as Howard mentioned, is the handbook. And then, but something else that another example of it, it came recently in this where people were learning together and creating something new with the News on Wiki project on Wikipedia.
Hey, Charlie, before we jump to that, could I just make a quick point about Howard's, respond to what Howard said?
Of course.
I just wanted to really emphasize, if people are watching this and are not familiar with the background of Howard or pedagogy, this whole like making it up as we're going along is something that I think it rests on really a wealth of real world experience and a lot of similar experiments over the years. And I think, Howard himself is, I would say you're one of the really the pioneers of self-directed online learning, I would say, in the world, and certainly in my world. And I think you've attracted a lot of similar people to you. So, just to anyone, if you're listening and it sounds like, oh, well, this is just going to be a fly by the seat of your pants, make it up as we go along thing. Well, yes, absolutely it is. But in a way that is really informed by a lot of experience. And I expect it'll be a lot of fun. And really
I will add that I did teach blended courses, blended meaning that we met face-to-face and online for 10 years at UC Berkeley and at Stanford. And it was really from that experience that I was invited to give what they call a Regents lecture at Berkeley about my methods. And at the end of the lecture, I proposed that we do this. And what's interesting is that part of the lecture was that I was supposed to meet with Cal faculty and graduate students face-to-face for a couple of weeks after the lecture. And I brought my laptop and I opened it to a video conferencing system and invited people via Facebook and Twitter to join us. And a couple of months later, all of the faculty and graduate students from Berkeley had dropped out, but people from UK, Mexico, Brazil, Japan, Canada, and the US, none of whom I had known and none of whom knew each other, had coalesced to create this thing. And I really have not been that active in recent years. That a community grew up, and if you instigate a community, it's really often a good idea to kind of step back and let the community find its sea legs. So I'm back in in the game here, but really all of the work has been done by an international group of people.
All right. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Pete. That was a great point. And all right. And then so another so the we do have the fly by our pants nature of it, but also rooting a lot of experience. And then one experience of pedagogy in action that we're going to talk about today is the News on Wiki project. And Pete and Kristy and Sherry collaborated on this. And I think why don't we have Sherry? Do you want to start describing the News on Wiki project, and then Pete and Kristy jump in?
Sure. So it's wonderful to be here with you guys, and the concept of pedagogy in itself, I think, is very timely, especially now in this moment where more and more people are finding themselves using Skillshares and other peer education and it's becoming more and more important to be able to continue to learn throughout not just your official education, but beyond that. So News on Wiki actually is, we are a campaign that began a few years ago, actually, in its first phase in 2018. I connected with Pete, who was part of that first project, at a Wikipedia conference at MIT in the Cambridge area in Massachusetts, and later on we decided to collaborate to work on this project, which is working to build trust and credible news sources by generating wiki content about newspapers. And so from 2020 to about 2021, we focused on 3 areas: Black-owned newspapers, local newspapers in a specific state. This time around, we chose Washington State, and stretching it a little bit more to focus on news from the Caribbean or in the Caribbean community where it within the United States. And so our aim was to create or improve 300 Wikipedia articles, as well as associated Wikidata entries on newspaper content. So now that you've got the general gist of what it is, I'm going to let Pete go a little bit more into detail about the project and its general aim and what it's about.
Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, I think News on Wiki is an example of this. Is there are sort of several intersecting goals and benefits to this campaign. So originally, the idea, which it was the brainchild of Mike Caulfield, who I think probably everyone on the call knows to some degree, who's a specialist in digital learning and misinformation in the Washington State University system, and Mike was basically looking to take on the issue that people were more and more encountering a publication that they'd never heard of from a small town on the other side of the country or something like that, and not knowing, is this just some fake publication that was just invented last week to drive a political narrative? Is it something that's been around for 100 years and is well respected in his community? Does it fall somewhere in between those things? Just to make like a quick assessment. And what he found, and other colleagues of ours have demonstrated with peer-reviewed research, is that when people are engaging with a question like that, number one, they will probably do a Google search or other web search, and number two, the search engines will actually pull in information from Wikipedia if it exists. So just by creating Wikipedia content, you will be informing people's understanding of the media landscape, even if they don't visit Wikipedia themselves just by what they see in the results of their web browser. So the general concept was really just about improving content on Wikipedia. It wasn't the core idea is not really about building community or about learning, but the what it turns out that in order to achieve that goal of generating content, really the best way to go about it is to bring in a lot of people who share that vision and help them learn the skills that they don't have yet. If they know about the news industry but they don't know anything about Wikipedia, then teach them about Wikipedia. If they know Wikipedia really well but they don't know a lot about the news industry or the area that you're focusing on, the Caribbean or Washington State, then you have opportunities for people to learn and to teach one another. So by doing that, we've really been able to put together a pretty vibrant community, I'd say, which includes librarians, dedicated Wikipedia editors, professors, students, and I think we really ought to hear from Kristy, who came in and really added a great dimension this time by bringing her digital media literacy course and having her students work on this. And sort of as an end result, you not only get the improved content on Wikipedia, but you end up with dozens of people who now understand Wikipedia better and understand how media fits together better. So in that way, it's sort of it's become something that's very much of the same universe as Peeragogy, even though that wasn't sort of the original core intent.
Yeah, so if I should just jump in, then I can kind of explain
Please.
how I got associated with Pete and Sherry, and it really is just kind of like a nice sort of right place at the right time sort of situation where I'd been teaching with Wikipedia for a few years in media literacy courses at Arizona State, and with the idea that part of media literacy is understanding where and how knowledge is produced, and in an online world, knowledge is produced not only by experts but by regular people, and Wikipedia really is a valuable resource. We all use it, but we've also all been taught that we shouldn't use it. So there's this long history of like it's not a good research place to go for information, and my colleagues and I at Arizona State have felt like that's kind of the wrong message to be sending, because students are using Wikipedia all the time. As Pete mentioned, it's often the first result when you search for anything on Google. And so I had been familiar with Mike's project, but I didn't really put the two together when I heard Pete and Sherry speaking at a Wiki conference, I think it was put on by Miss InfoCon, and I watched this webinar and thought, oh my goodness, I've been searching for a more specific way to involve my students in editing on Wikipedia, and News on Wiki is perfect. I teach at a journalism school, I teach media literacy classes, I'm very passionate about people being able to find credible sources and using the tools that we most often use in our regular research, like Wikipedia, like Google, to find credible sources. And so when I learned about this project, I was like, this is perfect. If we could help track down some of these newspapers, find even a little bit of information about whether or not they're notable enough to have their own Wikipedia entries, help them clean up these lists so we know what we want to still keep looking for. These are really great activities that help a larger cause. It serves the purpose of helping promote credible journalism. And then from my students' perspective, it really gives them, they have to learn an entirely new language to learn how to edit on Wikipedia, which is a big challenge for them. And many of them grumble about it, but they also feel like they learn a lot at the end. And then mostly it just changes their perception about information production and knowledge production. And that Wikipedia is not a bad place to go for information. And, that with footnotes and credible sources and knowing the rigor that editors must go through to have their edits accepted on Wikipedia, it's really an eye-opener for students. So it's this really great sort of a meta lesson in media literacy while helping the journalism business, which of course I'm passionate about as a journalism professor. So it's really, I felt very grateful to be connected with these two and this project. And I think for the most part, my students have really enjoyed it as well. And hopefully I've been able to contribute in a positive way.
I think if I could jump in on the journalism industry aspect of that, I think one of the things that this campaign really highlights is that when you kind of assemble people from enough sort of diverse backgrounds, it can be, and this is sort of why Wikipedia works, but it's also kind of why a campaign like this can work, is that you might have sort of individual special interests, but if you have a clear public interest that's at the core, that's kind of driving the project, if you have like a newspaper might look at a campaign like ours and think, oh, this is great from a marketing perspective, right? We've always wanted to have a Wikipedia page. It's going to help us be perceived as being more serious, et cetera, et cetera. So, that's the sort of thing that, like, unchecked, that's not really a good thing in the Wikipedia ecosystem, right? You don't want, you get lots of businesses trying to put an article about themselves on Wikipedia, and a lot of it is not really that good content. But if they're doing that in a context where there are students and professors and experienced Wikipedia editors, a lot of that kind of gets there's a lot of eyes from different perspectives, and really the interest of society in general of having information about its media sources tends to kind of override and have more of an influence than those individual special interests.
You also want the quality of the coverage of the paper to be there as well, because it can impact, what's used, what's not used, and so forth.
When I started out teaching, I started teaching digital journalism. I really didn't try to pass myself off as a journalist, but I was persuaded that I knew enough about the digital part, and I think it's only been in the recent years that I've come to understand the role of personal learning networks. But of course, every journalist has networks of sources, and increasingly, journalists are networked with other journalists. So I think when something happens in the world, there is a certain amount of peeragogy that goes on among networks of journalists. And I think we're just only beginning to learn how this informal peer learning is working in a number of different realms.
I would agree, and I would add to that there's the interaction even between journalists and citizens, right? So not even just journalists amongst themselves, but the interaction of regular people with journalists to produce news and information has only increased in the last 2 decades, and so that's another great example is these call outs of like, what have you seen, what do you know, what can you tell us about this news, and that can come from really anywhere.
And she also mentioned there's a lot of newspapers that are disappearing as well, but the information that they produce is still out there and is still affecting how, for example, affecting learning, affecting what we know about a subject. And so, campaigns like this, I have to steer away from calling it a project. It's a campaign like this, really highlight the importance of, maintaining and preserving knowledge about these resources, because they can fall through the cracks, especially if they're local news, and especially if they're, for example, from regions that can be overlooked as well. So that's another area that we were able to touch on. During a time where, for example, during the pandemic, we've lost a few papers, and as well as, and even before that, of course, the move to digital has been affecting that. So it's sort of an area of overlap where you can learn about the resources, learn about their origination, etc. But also you can help to preserve knowledge that may be fading about an item as well. And the research, obviously, learning how to find that information in the first place is also a skill that's naturally picked up whenever you're learning to edit and as well as using learning to code in some cases, using the platform as kind of an entryway for that as well. So there are many skills to be picked up, and there's also a good amount of impact for the time that you actually spend in the process.
I'd like to emphasize for the pilot course that, of course, if you're watching this, you're seeing people who are experts in academia and information science. It's really important for you to understand that you don't need to be in academia or journalism or a particular expert in information to join us. The recent work on collective intelligence has shown that it's not the particular expertise of the people in a group that contributes to its collective intelligence. It's really the diversity of the group. So we need people who want to learn together, whether or not you have any expertise at all.
I think that's something that really reflects what we've seen in News on Wiki as well. I mean, it's and even, you know, on a personal level, like my original experience with Wikipedia, like I didn't go to Wikipedia as an expert. I went to Wikipedia, this is like back in 2006. I had moved out to Oregon from the East Coast sometime earlier and was just feeling like I didn't know much about my home, about where I lived, you know, where I'd moved to. And so I went to Wikipedia to work on articles about Oregon as part of my process of learning about Oregon, you know, and so it's really, you know, just by jumping in and being willing to do a bit of research, find a good source to quote, to justify a fact that you put on Wikipedia, you know, it's the learning process and generating knowledge to help other people's learning processes naturally go hand in hand, I think, both in the peeragogy world and in the Wikipedia world.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, well, on that note, I think, so the third part of the course and the third topic today is that one assignment we know for sure is going to be to edit a Wikipedia article, and so that people, participants, whether you're you know, experienced media wiki text, you know, manipulator, or, you know, novice, we want you to edit one. And then if you're like feeling intimidated, there's some great resources out there. There's Sherry, you want to talk about the Afro Crowd videos tutorials?
Sure. So AfroCrowd is a group, and it's a Wikipedia initiative as well as user group in the Wiki community that I run, that focuses on getting more people of color and especially women involved in editing Wikipedia and different kinds of wiki platforms and projects. And so if you're interested, we welcome anyone, any background, any kind of interest, whether you have experience or not, in even using a computer in some cases. We have tons of resources online. I would say first go to afrocrowd.org/about. It's a great place to not just learn about AfroCrowd, but also to you know, lock into our YouTube tutorials, which are both in English and Spanish. It teaches you step by step how to edit Wikipedia, how to add images to Wikipedia, how to add citations, and also some of the other information that could be useful to you on your wiki journey. And also, you can join our mailing list there as well. We have events all year round, and usually one or two a month. And so if you would like to join us, that's a good way to do it. Also, we are connected to other groups in the Wiki community. Obviously, I'm very highly involved with Pete and News on Wiki, and we are excited about what's happened with that. And if you want to connect with News on Wiki, I do believe that that would also be a great way for you to learn. We hope that the campaign will continue into its next phase, so you can join us on News on Wiki as well. And we have, you know, there are opportunities to connect with us to learn as well. So for News on Wiki, you can follow us on Twitter at NewsWiki1, and just send us a message if you're interested and you just want to jump right in, because that account is still, we're still very active in that. If you want to connect with us, just contact us that way as well, and we will see how we can can further work together. But yeah, if you would like to edit at any time, there's lots of videos out there, not just with AfriCrowd, but in the Wiki community. You can go to YouTube, put in your query, and we'll probably be in one of those videos.
Okay, thanks. And then, all right, and then we'll try to stick to half hour-ish with these podcast episodes. We're gonna go a little over here, but that's okay. Nick, we're gonna bring in Charlotte now, and we've had some nice comments from the attendees. We've had hey Melanie, hey Robert, and Charlotte. Are any questions we've had from people in the audience that we should cover?
Yeah,
there's our distinguished panel.
There's some basic questions. I think a lot of people saw this and they heard pedagogy, and you can't just internalize it when you see the word. But a lot of basic questions like, what is pedagogy exactly? I used to learn bibliography from Wikipedia. That's from Vitor, one of our colleagues. And do you want to take any of those, or?
Sure. Yeah, I think go ahead, Howard. Yeah, you got it.
No, go, Charlie.
I was gonna say for like Lucinda, for the great question, what is pedagogy exactly? And I think as Charlotte said, it's tough to hit initially, but I think, well, to quote from the handbook, so it's like a flexible framework of techniques for peer learning and peer knowledge production, whereas pedagogy deals with transmission of knowledge from teachers to students. Peeragogy is what people use to produce and apply knowledge together. The strength is its flexibility and scalability. And then I think the editing, like Wikipedia itself, is a great example of pedagogy in action. Is people coming together to build knowledge, and then obviously the News on Wiki project within that, and then anyway, Howard, what were you gonna say?
I was just going to add that pedagogy is kind of a fancy word, but people have done peer learning since forever. It's just that we have some tools now that allow people all over the world to join together and to have access to the kind of knowledge that you had to have a university library to have access to before, and tools that actually have not been available for the several thousand years of classroom learning. So it's new, but it's not something that's unfamiliar to people. People learn together all the time.
I think
yes.
Sorry.
Oh, I think Howard, I think you and I have discussed before, and definitely Kristy, we've talked about this. That I think in the more formal education world, there's a concept of service learning, where you might have students that volunteer with a nonprofit whose mission is related to the course they're taking or something like that, and so they're actually doing something. They're doing some good in the world as they're gaining some real world experience that's informing their understanding of the subject. And I think that's one place where Wikipedia really fits in well with where you get like this meshing of self-directed learning and more formal education that I think is kind of the sweet spot of pedagogy.
Yeah, we always say that in the project, the core people have been together for about 10 years, but we didn't invent pedagogy. It's out there everywhere. It's every time you go outside or to your office or wherever you're experiencing it or doing it. But there's another question. I think Vitor, one of our colleagues, he runs the Milestone English course in Brazil, and I think I know what he means. How to make peer knowledge exchange easier. I mean, I think he's talking about there's all these different platforms and people doing interesting projects, and there's just like not a lot of interoperability, or not enough, or it's not good enough. Is that something you want to answer or respond to?
Yeah. So I think. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that sounds like something that we ought to pursue in the course.
Oh, nice. And yes, I think we're good. And anybody else have thoughts on that?
Kristy, what does that look like from a instructor's point of view? Like, if you want to expose your students to something like Wikipedia, I imagine there's a lot of challenges around, like, well, you know, if there's 17 different things they got to learn before they can even do something that's related to our course.
Yeah.
How do you address that?
I mean, it's a good point, and also just so much of formal education is so siloed, right? So what I do in my classroom, no one may ever know about, you know, it's just with among me and my students, which is why Wikipedia is a great place, I think, to center a lot of peer learning, because it is a place where everybody knows about, you know, it has global recognition. So it's not, you know, maybe you don't have to worry about other platforms in that way. And there are great videos. I mean, Sherry talked about the videos that she's produced. Pete, you've produced some great videos. I've had, you know, the Wiki Education Foundation has produced great training videos. And so there's a lot of ways for students, even outside of a, you know, class like mine, to learn how to do this, because people are contributing to that collaborative learning, that collaborative knowledge of how to use Wikipedia, so it's a little less intimidating. So I think Wikipedia as a destination for collaboration, it feels like a good fit because it is so globally known. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I chose it. I mean, we do things on social media and some other things as well. It's a digital media literacy class. We talk about a lot of different platforms, but it's really interesting to see the students start to understand how they're contributing to something that's bigger than a typical class assignment via doing research for Wikipedia in a way that I think is very useful. And it's super intimidating for them at first, and a lot of them, and it's interesting to Howard's comment about us being relative experts.
I wanted to mention that Kristy's class was amazing. It was phenomenal experience in collaborative learning, in that we originally, what we did was we came in, Pete and I came into the class to kind of talk about the project and kind of do some demonstrations of what to do. And Kristy had been working with the students before we had gotten there and afterwards. So it's part of her course. And one of the students actually was live editing while we were in the course doing the demonstration, and they came across an issue. And so we were able to help during that class work together to find a solution to the problem that had surfaced. And what it ended up being was a great opportunity to just show the collaborative nature of Wikipedia, that it isn't just this two-dimensional, website that, you know, you come in, you read it, and there's the knowledge that it's edited by people. It's really this collaborative space where people all over the world literally come together to work to improve knowledge and share knowledge, and as well as use different skills for this collaborative effort. So what you see on the website, on the page, is a product of that collaborative effort that's taken, maybe you enter something today, and through collaboration, 2 years from now, it's still growing and still developing. So, oftentimes it's, when I describe it, for what we do, for me, it's like growing a tree of knowledge. So you plant a seed. An event like this is sort of, we're talking about it, and then you plant the seed, which is, you put something in the ground, like an edit or some other kind of contribution, and then it's watered and given and nurtured through, different people putting in different efforts, whether it be fixing grammar, linking it to another page, doing something more in depth like what we're doing on News on Wiki, or adding an article or a sentence or an image or a sound or something. And next thing you know, you've got this wealth of knowledge that's branched off into this beautiful tree, or plants or whatever. I'm trying to grow strawberries right now.
Yeah.
I know.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
Well, it's kind of like
And then, you have that, yeah. And you have something like that.
It's kind of like what Howard was saying with the, his lecture, and then it kind of, here we are. It's great.
Nice.
Yeah. I just we had a couple of shout outs from people. Just Robert Best, Armano, he's one of our Brazilian colleagues. Robert.
Hey, Armano.
Yeah, hi, Robert. Vitor, Nat Hunter, Lucinda. Thank you all for coming by. And Joe had some questions, but we can answer them. Joe's one of our core people. So
yeah.
Thanks. You can wrap it up, Charlie. Let's go ahead.
Okay. And so thank you everybody for our amazing panel for joining. Thank you, Charlotte, for all the technical direction and producing, and people in the audience for the great comments and questions. And look forward to learning with you in the course, and sign up for the News and Wiki project. And we will talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.